East Africa, Kenya's public prosecutor has confirmed that TV journalist Jackie Maribe and her fiancé will be charged with murder of a woman in Nairobi. Jackie Maribe, a news anchor with Citizen Television, is expected to plead in court after a mental assessment is done. Mrs. Maribe and her fiancé, Joseph Kuriya Irungu, were in court together for the first time after appearing separately in previous hearings. The court heard that both will be charged with the murder of a businesswoman, Monica Kimani, whose body was discovered in a bathtub last month with her hands tied behind her back and her throat slit. A joint United Nations African Union delegation is on a 3-day visit to South Sudan to support peace efforts in the country. The delegation includes UN Women Executive Director Phumzile Mlambo Nguka and UN Peacekeeping Chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix. Mr. Lacroix says the joint mission is about showing appreciation for the effort of UN peacekeepers in the country and expressing solidarity with the people of South Sudan. He further stated that the officials were visiting to see how all those involved could work together so that peace will come back to the world's youngest nation.
Showing, first of all, recognition and indeed appreciation for what our UNMISS colleagues are doing in a very difficult situation. And it's also about expressing solidarity, the AU, the UN solidarity with the people of South Sudan, and listening to colleagues, listening to the authorities in South Sudan, listening to the South Sudanese on how we can work together so that peace will come back to South Sudan. There is a glimmer of hope now with the peace agreement, but we know much more needs to be done, and we're here to see how we can help that. You know, what we take away from this discussion is that, you know, with more women in UNMISS and with more women in our peacekeeping operation, we are better at engaging with the population, we're better at creating trust, confidence, and therefore we are better at building peace.
So this mission, to me, is a mission to tell all of us in Africa that the dream of silencing the guns in Africa is here, and it's up to us to really take the bull by the horns now in South Sudan to make sure that this region, which has been dubbed the Great Lakes region of conflict, becomes the Great Lakes region of peace and prosperity.
The United Nations is calling for greater international attention to Chad as it tackles poverty, population movement, malnutrition and access to basic social services. Administrator for the UN Development Programme, Achim Steiner, and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, made this call as they wrapped up their joint first visits to the Central African country. Both men call for greater and longer-term commitments from donors to support the emergency needs of some 4.9 million vulnerable people throughout the country.
This morning, Mark and I visited this hospital here in N'Djamena, a hospital that has just increased the number of beds from 85 to over 500, which is a major boost for primary health care, but also for helping particularly mothers and their children on the issue of malnutrition. We spent this morning at a special center here where mothers can come with their children, have them examined and assessed, be given advice on how to deal with malnutrition, and hopefully leave the hospital in a better position to avert something that is perfectly avoidable if you have both the information, the awareness and the knowledge of how to do it. Malnutrition is something that we can beat.
We're also here in Chad to understand the nature of the development challenge here and the humanitarian consequences of a pervasive, chronic, long-lasting failure to develop. This country has one of the lowest levels of education, of health care, of water and sanitation. That means there's very, very high levels of chronic poverty.